It's a cold morning in ancient Athens. The sun is just beginning to rise, casting a pale glow over the city. Inside a small prison cell, an old man sits, waiting for the hemlock to arrive. His name is Socrates, and he's been sentenced to die for corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods of the city. Outside, his friends and followers gather, their faces etched with grief and disbelief. They're here to say goodbye to the man who's taught them how to question, how to think, how to live. And they are about to hear his final words, a mystery that, for centuries, would stir the minds of philosophers, scholars, and curious souls alike. Socrates' last words, as recorded by Plato, were, "Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay the debt and do not neglect it." A strange choice for a final message, don't you think? Especially coming from a man whose life was dedicated to the pursuit of truth and wisdom. But here he was, making what seemed to be a casual request to honor a forgotten debt, a rooster owed to the god of healing, Asclepius. Why? What did he mean by it? Was it a final joke, a metaphor, or perhaps something deeper? In Greek mythology, Asclepius was the god of healing and medicine. People offered sacrifices to him when they had been healed or sought to be. So, on the surface, Socrates' words seem to imply gratitude for healing. But healing from what? Socrates was about to die, so physical healing didn't apply. Could it be that Socrates was alluding to a different kind of healing, a liberation of the soul from the physical body? In Socrates' view, death wasn't something to fear, but rather a release, a return to the realm of the eternal. He believed that the soul was immortal and that death merely freed it from the body's limitations. So, perhaps his last words were his way of thanking the gods for this healing of the soul. For Socrates, life was a kind of illness, a distraction from the true pursuit of wisdom. In death, he believed, the soul could finally grasp knowledge unclouded by the senses. The debt he owed could signify his gratitude for this ultimate release. But isn't this idea intriguing? It's as though Socrates is suggesting that life, with all its noise, pain, and limitations, is an illness, and death is the cure. It's a shocking thought, one that challenges our instinctive fear of death and our drive to cling to life at all costs. Could it be that we too have misunderstood life's purpose and the nature of death? Socrates' last words also reflect his characteristic irony. Throughout his life, Socrates used irony as a tool to question others' beliefs and expose contradictions in their thinking. He'd often pretend to be ignorant, asking simple questions that gradually revealed the flaws in people's logic. This technique, known as Socratic irony, was his way of leading others to wisdom, not by giving them answers, but by helping them see the gaps in their own knowledge. Perhaps his last words were a final act of irony. By making this puzzling request, he left his followers, and all of us, with a question rather than an answer. In doing so, he ensured that his legacy would continue, not as a set of doctrines, but as a challenge to think and question. Socrates wasn't interested in giving people easy answers. He wanted them to struggle with the questions themselves, to confront the mystery. In a way, his last words were his ultimate reminder that life's deepest truths aren't things we can simply be told. They're things we have to discover for ourselves. Instead of seeking definitive answers, perhaps our task is to live in the questions. There's another angle to consider. For Socrates, philosophy wasn't just a career or a hobby, it was a way of life. In the Apology, he famously claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living. To him, philosophy was the highest pursuit, a sacred mission to uncover truth and virtue. And death, he argued, was simply the next step in this journey. In ancient Greece, it was common for philosophers to view life as a preparation for death. Plato, Socrates' student, later expanded on this idea, arguing that philosophy was, in essence, a rehearsal for death. By practicing detachment, reflection, and self-examination, philosophers aimed to purify their souls, preparing themselves for the next phase of existence. Socrates' last words, then, could be seen as a kind of graduation speech. He was acknowledging that his earthly journey was complete, that he had done all he could in this realm. His debt to Asclepius was paid. He was ready to move on. This perspective suggests that life is not an end in itself but a preparation for something greater. One of the most remarkable things about Socrates' death is his fearlessness. Here was a man who, despite facing execution, remained calm, even cheerful. He didn't beg for mercy, didn't lash out at his accusers, didn't waver in his beliefs. Instead, he faced death with dignity, almost as if he welcomed it, and his final words reflect that courage. In a world that often encourages us to avoid discomfort, Socrates' example is startling. He reminds us that courage isn't about being invincible or unafraid. It's about facing the unknown with a sense of purpose. Death for him was the ultimate unknown, the final mystery. And yet he embraced it as part of his philosophical journey. This courage is something we can all learn from, not just in facing death, but in confronting the uncertainties of life itself. How often do we shy away from risks, from change, from the unknown? How often do we cling to the familiar, even when it no longer serves us? Socrates teaches us that the greatest growth often comes from stepping into the unknown, from challenging ourselves to move beyond our comfort zones. Socrates' last words are more than just a historical curiosity. They're a powerful reminder of his legacy. In a single sentence, he encapsulated the essence of his philosophy: a life of questioning, a fearless embrace of the unknown, and a deep commitment to truth. His words challenge us to look beyond the surface, to seek meaning where others see only mystery. And that's perhaps the biggest lesson of all. Socrates didn't give us a set of doctrines or a list of commandments. He gave us a way of thinking, a method for exploring life's biggest questions. His last words were a continuation of that gift, a final riddle, a puzzle left for us to solve. Thinking back to the trial of Socrates, it's easy to see it as a tragedy, a brilliant mind condemned to death for his ideas. But what if we looked at it differently? What if, for Socrates, life was a game, a philosophical exercise in which he played his role to the fullest? His death, then, wasn't a defeat. It was the final move in a game he had been playing his entire life. In this sense, Socrates' last words could be seen as a nod to the rules of the game. Just as a player acknowledges the end of a match, Socrates was acknowledging the end of his journey. He had played the game of life with integrity, curiosity, and courage, and now he was ready to step aside, leaving us to carry on. What if we too saw life as a game in which the goal isn't to win but to play with purpose, to engage with the world, to ask questions, to seek truth? It's a perspective that frees us from the pressure to achieve, to accumulate, to control. Instead, it invites us to live with curiosity, to embrace challenges, to see every experience as part of the game. As we reflect on Socrates' last words, we're left with more questions than answers, and perhaps that's exactly what he intended. What does it mean to live a good life? How should we approach death, uncertainty, and the unknown? What is the true nature of wisdom, and how do we cultivate it? In seeking these answers, we join Socrates on his journey, continuing the legacy of questioning that he began. His final words are an invitation, a reminder that life's greatest mysteries are not obstacles to overcome, but mysteries to explore. And in the end, perhaps that's the true meaning of philosophy, not a search for answers, but a celebration of the questions.